Hi, my name is Reed Silverne, and the name of this show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is I'm a federal worker and proud of it. I'm going to talk about a couple different things today, but the first thing may very well be good news for us and bad news for our enemy in Iraq, and that is one of the leaders of the insurgents, or at least the most famous leader of the insurgents, right now is a fellow named Abu Musab al-Zarkawi. He's a member of Al-Qaeda, and he's the head of Al-Qaeda's branch in Iraq, or Mesopotamia, between the two rivers. And from what seems to be the facts, or at least from his own people, he appears to be badly wounded, and according to some sources, is determining who his successor is going to be. This came out the last couple days. There was an Islamic website, which I guess is a usual method for the Al-Qaeda in Iraq to put out their message. And they said that Abu Musab al-Zarkawi had been injured for the sake of God, which means that he was injured in battle. Term commonly used by militants in Iraq to refer to wounds sustained at the hands of American or friendly Iraqi troops. Statement gave no details about the injury or how it was inflicted, but it appealed to all Muslims to pray for Mr. Zarkawi's speedy recovery. Of course, I'm praying for his speedy death. He is an evil person. He is the guy behind most of the suicide bombs. He claimed to be responsible for the suicide bomb that killed the head of the UN in Iraq a few months after the beginning of the insurgency. I believe the fellow's name was Mr. DeMello, and he was organizing the end of the coalition authority and the beginning of an actual Iraqi government. His death caused the UN to pull out very early, and caused a lot of problems politically as well. And of course, he has been bringing in foreign fighters being mostly Syrians, Saudis, people from other Muslim countries, to go in there and suicide themselves, to either belt up with suicide bombs around their waist, go into lines of people trying to join the military or the police, blow them up, go into markets where people are buying and selling, blow them up, get in cars and drive the cars toward checkpoints, American soldiers, blow them up, drive alongside of American convoys, blow them up, usually blowing up innocent Iraqis who just happen to be driving by in the same area, because the Iraqi people don't, for the most part, have armored vehicles. And fortunately, even though I've been complaining about it, a lot of our vehicles are now armored, which they weren't at the beginning of the war. Nevertheless, we are losing a lot of troops. Since the middle of May and this latest insurgency offensive, we've lost 58 troops, but the Iraqis have lost about 600 people. So it could be good news that Zarkawi may be nearing his end, and he is the organizer. He has a $25 million bounty on his head, exactly the same as Osama bin Laden, and they probably want to get him more because he has been responsible for killing a lot of Iraqis and a lot of Americans. Last week, a statement issued in his name in the same website justified the killing of Iraqi civilians in the course of the insurgent attacks, saying it was necessary, if you must kill them, to get to the enemy. And of course, they've been killing, in many cases, only Iraqi civilians. There have been cases where they've gone into marketplaces inhabited by mostly Shiites, who were not the people behind the insurgency, and blowing them up, but also blowing up Sunnis as well. The attacks have continued in a wave of insurgent violence, killed 58 American troops, 600 Iraqi civilians since the beginning of May. He sought, apparently were all kinds of uncorroborated reports in the last week or so. Ever since our battle in Al-Qaim. Al-Qaim is a town that's right on the Syrian border, or not exactly, but near the Syrian border. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a very, very large offensive over there, about 1,000 Marines, many Iraqi government troops as well. And apparently, over 125 insurgents were killed, most of them foreigners. And the story seems to be that he may have been hit in a bombing of foreign fighters in one of those locations in Al-Qaim. But there have been a number of sightings. One of them was that he sought hospital treatment last month in at least 2 cities in the desert of western Iraq, and that would be that Al-Qaim area. Iraqi and American forces mounted a nighttime cordon around this Kark hospital, central Baghdad, after a tip that Zarkawi had gone to Baghdad in order to get some treatment. They found no trace of him. They've arrested 20 of his closest compatriots. Most of that is because back in February, they actually caught Zarkawi in a truck behind another truck that was about a half a mile ahead. They've been wondering up to that point, how is Zarkawi getting away? How is he getting through the checkpoints? What is his methodology? And what his methodology was at that time is there would be a truck that would travel about a half a mile ahead, and the truck would hit or be attacked or meet up with or turn around at checkpoints, and therefore he would have warning to turn around while he was still far enough away from normal rifle fire or whatever. What happened here is the truck turned around, they mobilized 3 helicopters, a whole bunch of Humvees, chased it, and realized that a car about a half a mile behind them had turned around as well. The helicopters came out there. That was the car that Zarkawi was actually in. They chased him down and actually killed the driver. However, while the car had gone underneath an overpass, Zarkawi had jumped out and saved himself out of a moving car and had escaped up in the side of the freeway or highway and had gotten away. However, he had left in the car his memory sticks, which are these little things that fit into the computer. A lot of people have them nowadays, with names of a lot of his compatriots, a lot of the locations, a lot of his arms caches, a lot of his plans were in there, and his laptop computer. So they were able to pick up 20 of his compatriots. That didn't, however, even slow down the insurgency at all. In fact, after that incident, the insurgency had gotten much worse, and there were truck bomb after truck bomb after truck bomb. Apparently, there were a lot of truck bombs and IEDs that had been set up in advance that were ready to go. And by truck bombs, I mean suicide bombers as well. So the site is monitored by a company called the Site Institute, or I guess it's a nonprofit. And a lady named Rita Katz is the translator. And she said in a telephone interview that the statement claiming Zarkawi had been injured appeared on the internet message board that had been used regularly by Zarkawi's group. I believe that this is an authentic message, Mrs. Katz said, and I really believe that this came from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Statement signed by Abu Maysara al-Iraqi, which means the Iraqi. Zarkawi's organization spokesman described the militant leader's zeal as a priceless thing for the insurgents and added, even the prophet was injured. Let everybody know that the injury of our leader is an honor, causes us to surround our enemy tighter and encouraging us to increase the intensity of attacks upon him. I think he protests too much. Other reports appearing in Iraqi newspapers, also confirmed, said that Zarkawi was in a hospital in Haditha, which is another very, very major Sunni triangle insurgency center, not too far from Ramadi, and Fallujah, and went undetected when it was searched by American troops in early May. The Sunday Times of London, which is an English newspaper, quoted an unnamed doctor in Ramadi as saying that a well-dressed aides of Zarkawi took him to the hospital there on May 11th, which is not too long ago, 4 days after the Marine offensive began, and that he was bleeding heavily from unspecified wounds. Paper quoted the doctor as saying he tried unsuccessfully to persuade Zarkawi to remain for treatment, only to be offered and to refused a wad of US dollars to secure his silence. So it seems that Zarkawi may be wounded. I don't think they're going to take him to a hospital again, and they may say that he's been killed soon and replaced with somebody else. There's also stories, just like everything else in the Middle East, where there's one conspiracy theory, there's always a second, that he's setting himself up to claim that he's dead, to give himself a little more leeway and maybe be able to get in and out of Syria easier on the claim that he is dead. However, it appears that if any of these stories are true, again, it might be true. You never know. And for another good news story about Iraq, and this one goes back a couple of weeks, but it was in Defense Link, and I don't know if people are reading that, but Defense Link is a very good site to see what's going on over there, at least from the Pentagon's point of view. New 5-ton armored gun trucks fielded in Iraq, providing U.S. troops with effective protection against insurgents. 31 5-ton trucks in Iraq, these up-armored trucks. They take the trucks 5-ton heftiness, heavier than a Humvee, at armor and multi-weapons capacity, including hard-hitting 50-caliber machine guns. You've got a much more serious convoy protection platform. Why am I bringing this up? Because there's been numerous cases, and at the beginning of the war, Rumsfeld, not only did he not protect the troops that were out there on the front lines in Humvees, but even more so, he didn't protect the logistics and the line of the logistics line, in other words, a line of communications, what they call it, by providing the soldiers and the civilians with armored trucks. And as a result, lots and lots of trucks were blown up. There were lots and lots of cases where convoys were ambushed, lots and lots of cases where important things didn't go through, lots of cases where oil especially and gasoline trucks were blown up and that cut off the road. There's no doubt about it. Every military expert says that securing the line of communications is absolutely vital. I think these trucks are going to help do that. However, the question comes up, if we knew we were going to go in, and we did, if we knew we were going to have a long line of communication, and we do, how come they didn't set these up 2 years ago in order to protect the troops and protect the supply lines earlier? But hindsight is 20/20, as they say, and it's easy to say this is something that went wrong. However, they should do better. Now, all this good news, at least in my opinion, about Zarkawi possibly being wounded and maybe taken out, about things getting a little better in the field, and now moderates have had what can only be described as a victory in the Senate. Why do I say that? What has happened is there was a threatened change in the Senate rules. Now, right now, and I'm a Republican myself, I don't have a major problem with it. We have a Republican president, We have a Republican House of Representatives. We have a Republican Senate. And that's pretty close to a one-party system. There are, however, because our system is set up with checks and balances so that no one group within our government has too much power. And the American people, for the most part, like to elect Republicans when Democrats dominate the Republican presidents, when Democrats dominate the Congress, Democratic presidents like Clinton when the Republicans took over the House and Senate. We like divided government. Why do Americans have a tendency to like divided government? Is it because we don't want anything to get done? That's partially it. Because there is a distinct belief, especially among conservatives, although that seems to be going away now that we have a conservative presidency and conservative Congress, that we don't want the government to be able to do too much. If the government is too effective, if there's one party controlling legislation and the same party controlling the White House and the same party is controlling our bureaucracy and the same party is dominant, or at least their viewpoint is dominant in the courts, that things might get done that really hurt the minority or really hurt everybody else. Or there could be hubris. What is hubris? Hubris is the belief that everything is always going to go my way. And it's a literary term. And basically it says, hubris is Greek for pride, and it's the pride that goes before a fall. And I think that we're very, very close to that with the Republicans, especially in the Senate. Why do I say that? Because there's a great worry that very, very strong conservatives might change the balance of power in the Supreme Court, because we have a Republican president, and for everybody who knows a little bit about how our government works, the Senate actually approves nominees not only for cabinet posts and things like that, called advice and consent, but also for Supreme Court justices and justices of lower courts. Now, right now, a very, very unusual situation for an entire one-term president. Not a single Supreme Court justice has come up for a selection in George W. Bush's term. And that has been just about 5 years right now. However, one of the most important Supreme Court justices, Justice Rehnquist, who's actually the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, came down with cancer of the esophagus. He's extremely sick, and there's a very, very good case that he may be replaced very, very soon. So there's a struggle going on in the Senate over court selections. And the reason is because the Senate, which originally was selected by the legislatures of the states, actually there was a constitutional amendment that created direct election for the senators. But be that as it may, there's 2 senators from each state, no matter how small and no matter how big. And one of the big powers that the Senate was given, that the House was not, was advice and consent of cabinet members. And that's why, and not just cabinet members, but also, for instance, the ambassador to the UN, where there's been some controversy, a fellow named Mr. Bolton. And for the court nominees. And this is not just the Supreme Court. And the issue here is the next court down, the appeals court. So there were about 35 appointees to the appeals court that were appointed by President Bush. And of those 35, 10 had been stymied by the Democrats. How is that possible? Well, it is possible because of the way the Senate is set up currently. Basically, in the Senate, you need 51, which is a very, very slight majority. In fact, you only need 50 and the vice president who can break a tie in order to pass a bill. However, in order for a bill to be voted on, there has to be an ending of debate. That's called cloture. And cloture takes 60 votes to win. So extending debate, which is what is called a filibuster in these constitutional terms, can go on forever unless you can get 50 senators to vote for it. Why is that difficult? Because the Republicans have only 55 senators. The Democrats have 44, plus one switchy. I can't put it any other way. One independent that switched from the Republican Party to no party. He didn't want to become a Democrat. So the Republicans, what they were trying to do was to force a vote on one of these candidates, a candidate named Justice Priscilla R. Owen of Texas. Actually, not that extreme candidate. And by forcing this vote, the Democrats would run a filibuster, and the Republicans could then do a rule change. Now, oddly enough, a rule change can't be filibustered. So any Senate rule can be changed with only 51 votes. However, in the past, the votes that protect the minority, which is the party that has the fewer senators, has always been a very, very sensitive thing, because sometimes the Republicans are in charge of the Senate, sometimes the Democrats are in charge of the Senate, and it is the one check and balance against the president. Especially if the House, which is basically up and down a majority vote, and really controlled by the Speaker of the House, who's Hastert right now, and the Majority Leader, who's Tom DeLay, who can stop and prevent any discussion of anything that goes onto the floor of the House. So the majority of the party in the House, which has been the Republicans since 1994, can basically keep any legislation from going through. Not so with the Senate. And on top of that, up to now, you've needed 60 votes to get something passed. Now, what happened was this nuclear option, which was this rule vote to take away the ability of the minority party, which could be the Republicans someday. There's a Democratic president, and the Republicans don't have 51 senators, to keep them from being able to filibuster a nominee to a court. What happened was 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, all centrists, and basically on the Democratic side, led by Senator Byrd and a few other senators, and on the Republican side, led by John McCain, our senator from Arizona, and Warner, who is a senator from Virginia, got together and they made an agreement that the Democrats would only filibuster in extraordinary circumstances, and that the Republicans, these 7 Republicans, could defeat any rule change. Why is that? Because a rule change has to be passed by 51 Republicans, and there's only 55. So 55 minus 7 leaves 48, and even with the vice president involved, still loses. So basically, 7 Republicans can stop any rule change. 7 Democrats, however, because there's only 45 Democrats and near Democrats, can stop any filibuster. Because if they vote for the Republican side, then they have less than cloture. So here you go. And that is what happened. They agreed to pass 3 of these candidates and to stall votes on 2 others, and basically to squelch 2 others. My name is Reed Silverne. Name of the show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker, and I am proud of it. I'll be on in about 2 weeks, and this show is about